From the campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, the Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the gubernatorial Republican primary candidate debate.
Good evening and welcome to a live debate between the four Republican primary candidates running to be their party's nominee for governor in the state of Utah. My name is Bruce Lindsay. I have been invited to moderate this evening's debate, sponsored by the Utah Debate Commission. This event, held on June 1st, is part of the Utah Debate Commission's work to educate voters and to encourage the civil exchange of ideas. The four Republican primary candidates are with me here, socially distanced, in the Dolores Dory Eccles Broadcast Center on the campus of the University of Utah. They are, alphabetically, Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox, former Utah House Speaker Greg Hughes, former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman, and former Utah Republican Party Chairman Thomas Wright. They are competing to become the Republican nominee for governor on the ballot in November. If you are watching or listening to this debate live, we encourage your comments on social media using the hashtags UTDebates or Listen, Learn, Vote. Now, the Utah Debate Commission has established the format to be used for tonight's debate. Candidates will have a designated amount of time to respond to each question I will specify the amount of time in each case. And the moderator has discretion to permit brief rebuttals as well as to ask follow-up questions. A random draw approved by the candidates held prior to the debate determined that Jon Huntsman will respond to the first question first, and the order will thereafter follow alphabetically. We will alternate to answers first on the remaining questions throughout the debate. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. The Debate Commission weeks ago committed to you that you would receive some form of an introductory question so that you could talk about yourself. In conformity with that and acknowledging the reality of our present situation, let me phrase the question this way, if I may. Given the riots over the weekend, unprecedented in the state of Utah, what makes you superior to, don't be shy, what makes you different from the other candidates on this stage in terms of your specific leadership abilities to bring healing to the divided communities of our state? Mr. Huntsman.
Bruce, thank you, and a welcome to all fellow Utahns who are tuned in. One word. Leadership. Two words, experienced leadership. I've been in the saddle before as governor. I've brought people together. I've helped to build this economy. But what you need to know about me, I'm standing here as a candidate because I'm married to the finest human being I know. I'm standing here as a candidate because I have 7 kids who inspire me, including 2 who wear the uniform for the United States Navy. I'm standing here because I know what we have been through most recently has caused anxiety and a lot of despair on the part of people. I know it's a confused world. I see opportunity for our state in that confusion. But I'm here also because I believe in conservative libertarian philosophies that I think should guide our future, Bruce. And I'm standing here because I believe we have an historic opportunity not just to recover from pandemics, riots, and uncertain times, but to be reborn. Reborn as the crossroads of the world. I will settle for nothing less.
Thank you, Mr. Huntsman. Mr. Wright, why are you the superior leadership choice?
I believe that we need to listen to each other in society far more than we are right now. We have a variety of differences. We come from different backgrounds. And I believe that people that come from different temperaments, talents, and convictions are superior to those who are similar. As governor, I want to sit down and I want to listen. I've been the only candidate in this race that's consistently given out his personal mobile phone number. I'm getting about 20 calls an hour some days, and I'm talking to candidates, or I'm talking to voters and citizens about all kinds of issues. If we want to heal our divides and we want to understand each other, we must first learn to listen. I have consistently done that in my life. I've done that in my business, and I will do that as governor by bringing people together, by listening, by having difficult conversations, talking about difficult things, the things that divide us right now. We are a strong people, but we have healing to do. We need to get together. We need to talk things out and come up with a plan by listening to each other's perspectives. And as governor, I'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Cox, why are you the superior leader to bring us together?
Ladies and gentlemen, 6.5 years ago, out of nowhere, Governor Herbert asked me to serve as his lieutenant governor. It was a surprise to me, it was a surprise to our family, but it's been the honor of a lifetime to serve in that position over those past 6.5 years. You can see my record, it's very clear. I have a history of bringing people together, bringing disparate groups together, bringing voices to those who feel like they often have no voice. What's special about Utah, we are facing hard times, but we faced hard times before, and we always come back better and stronger. We are an example to the nation. When I was asked to serve as lieutenant governor, I almost said no because we were staying in Fairview. It was a 200-mile round trip every day, and it was my wife that changed things. She said, maybe the fact that we don't want to do this means that we should. There are too many people who want these jobs. We need more people that don't. People who can understand and reach out to those who are suffering. We know in Utah that the answers will never come from Washington, D.C. They will come from Main Street and State Street, from Logan to St. George. That's why I'm running for governor, to bring us together.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Hughes, why are you the superior leader to bring us together?
Thank you, Bruce. Great question to start this debate with. I am the proven conservative in this race, proud to say it, with a track record. Look at what's happening right now. We're seeing some brazen behavior on all fronts and in many ways. These are strange and challenging times that we're in. I will tell you this. We have a movement right now with the Democrats that are just saying it very clearly that they would like to change their registration, not because they are converting to our party to become Republicans. They've read the platform and they want to be a Republican. They're doing it to influence the outcome of our party's nominee. What I know about what's happening, if you don't believe me, just look at the news reports. We have interviews going on that say anyone but Hughes. You've got Jim DeBacchus, who was the chair of the Democrat Utah Party, who's a Republican, registered Republican today. We brought people together when on Operation Rio Grande. We fought lawlessness. We took on things people said they couldn't, but we did it as a conservative and through with conservative principles.
I would like to stay with news of the day and give you each a chance to respond to this headline that is widely reported, a conference call this morning from the White House to the nation's governors. And the report says the president described governors as weak in the face of racial unrest and said if they did not confront protesters with force, they would look like fools. Widely reported. If you were governor and you were on that call, how would you respond to that advice? Mr. Wright, for a minute.
Well, this is a time for leadership in the state of Utah, and let me tell you, this time we find ourselves in is very difficult. And I'm not afraid to talk about what I saw when it comes to George Floyd. I was very uncomfortable with what happened. I was devastated. It was hard to explain to my children, and I want to tell you the solution to the problem. Not a solution, an idea that I have as governor, a very specific idea, and I hope that the viewers today will listen to what I say. I'm not going to answer these questions in platitudes. I'm going to give specific ideas. As governor, I want to get involved in the Peace Officer Standards and Training. And that's called POST. It's the POST Council. As governor, I will direct the Commissioner of Public Safety in his role on the POST Council to ensure curriculum for all new and future officers so they'll be trained, so that they're listening and learning and we're being compassionate with each other and we can take action on racial inequality. And we could even discuss a course for current police officers. So I know they want to be a part of the solution and they should have an equal opportunity. Together, Utah can come together and lead the nation on this front. And that's what I would have told the president.
Mr. Cox, how would you respond to that suggestion to use greater force?
Let's be very clear. The death of George Floyd was a murder, and there is no place for police brutality in America. We know that, and we have to stand up strong. At the same time, these lawful protests that are taking place have been hijacked by agents of chaos, by people who don't care about the movement at all, who aren't trying to make the world a better place. They only care about destroying lawfulness, they care about destroying property, they care about defacing property, and we must, and we did, respond with strength to those people so that we can allow the people space who are protesting lawfully, so that we can work together, and we will work together. We're working with our Multicultural Commission. We're working with our Martin Luther King Commission. We have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow to talk about these very issues, but there is absolutely no place for chaos. There is no place for destruction. We must have law and order.
Mr. Wright, how would you have responded to that encouragement? I'm sorry, Mr. Hughes.
Hughes. So let's choose our words carefully. Protest versus riot. I think there's a big difference. I join in the protest of what's happened to Mr. Floyd. The issue is not the protest, the outrage, the murder that we did truly see before our eyes on that camera. And there have been peaceful protests that have happened. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's incumbent upon us to really push back when we see this. And there was something amazing happening in this country where we were. It didn't matter what party you were or what philosophy and politics you subscribe to. There was a recoil that happened in this country that has been robbed from those that care. The rioters, those that look to prey upon the weak, those that try to create fear, civil unrest, break the law, that isn't what this is about. That's not the protest or the feelings that we all as a nation felt, and that is what has to be dealt with head on. I'm with this president. If you're going to go and go find quarantine issues to bring down the law, but you're not going to let these issues be handled, and you're going to let these rioters go, that's a deal killer, and we cannot let that happen to our country or our state. Mr.
Hussman.
I'd have a conversation with the president like I have on many occasions. We shoot straight with each other. I've got a good relationship with him. But I would ask, first and foremost, are we doing enough to thank law enforcement for putting their lives on the line? Are we doing enough to thank them and their families for the restraint that was shown in the face of anarchy? And then I would tell the president something else, because I served him in Moscow. I'd say on Saturday I saw something I've never seen in this state. I saw Black Hawk helicopters circling in the sky downtown. I saw Humvees at the intersections. I heard curfews that were being enforced by the state. I would say, Mr. President, I'm concerned about civil liberties. This is not what we see in the state of Utah. Maybe others, but not here. This is what you see in other countries. We have the ability to manage our own situation. Thank you very much.
Let me just follow up very briefly. There's been a you've differentiated between violent and nonviolent protests this week. Would you just speak for 30 seconds to what you perceive as being the underlying cause of each of those, Mr. Wright?
Underlying cause for what exactly?
For the grievances. What are these people trying to say who feel like they're not being heard, so they turn to demonstrations?
Well, they're frustrated. They're frustrated by the leadership that they see on so many issues that face our country, whether it's racial inequality, law enforcement challenges. They see a lot of challenges in our state and in our country, and they're frustrated and they're speaking out. And this is why I've said consistently in this race that we need to elect new people. If we continue to elect the same people, we're going to continue to have the same problems. We have challenges in this state, we have challenges in this country, and they can be solved by new people that have new perspectives. I'm the only person here that's not a career politician, and I sincerely ask for people to consider me with their vote.
Mr. Cox, what do you hear from those demonstrations?
Well, there is for sure real frustration, especially in our Black community, those who for generations have felt this type of discrimination. At the same time, there's frustration within our police departments when they feel like they're not getting the support from some elected officials that they deserve. We also lost one of Utah's finest in Ogden this past week, and we must remember how difficult these jobs are for the men and women in law enforcement. They deserve our support, and they are working around the clock to stop these rioters and these looters and to protect the property and lives of Utahns, even those that are protesting.
Mr. Hughes, what messages are you hearing?
So, look, the premise of the question I actually reject. I don't believe that the people we are seeing that are rioting are the same people who want to have their voice heard.
That's not the premise.
Yeah, so I would say that they haven't turned their voice to violence or to doing something like this. You have people, I have a very good friend of mine that has every right, more so than anyone on this stage, to be incensed about what's happened. Okay, and this person's described the violence in our city, and he lives here in Salt Lake, as punks that have come and exploited an issue that's happening and that is ripping at the heartstrings of people in this state and are exploiting it to create fear. We have to have strong law enforcement. I cannot believe that we have even a tone of adversarial tone towards our law enforcement that are trying to maintain public safety and prevent lawlessness.
Thank God, call time. Mr. Hussman.
I've worked hard to defend the rights of people to protest. That's an American tradition, and we should all be proud of that. But people feel, and the reason that President Trump got elected is you have people who feel that the American dream is no longer achievable, that the promise of America no longer works for them. So it's not about where we've been, the anarchy on the street, it's where we're going. It's bringing people together and having conversations and working toward problem solving, just as I discussed with Reverend Franz Davis, one of my great friends and leaders in this community. It's not where we've been, it's where we're going that will make a big difference.
Thank you. Let me note for our broadcast viewers, there's not an audience in the studio. The few of us here are following guidelines for public health because we do have another crisis for a governor on our hands. Let me turn to this debate's media representative, Lad Egan, a political reporter from KSL, to pick up the questioning.
Good evening, candidates. Utah has racked up more than $100 million in emergency spending since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. We've seen some successes and some mistakes. So I have a two-part question for you. First, has that taxpayer money been spent effectively? And second, what have we learned to better prepare Utah for the next public safety emergency, whether that be another pandemic, an earthquake, or another natural disaster?
That would be first to Mr. Cox.
Well, thank you for the question. The last 2.5 months have been some of the most challenging in our state's history. We've called upon local leaders across the state at every level of government, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the faith-based sector. We have all worked together on this response. I'm very proud of the people who have been working together and made those decisions in that response. Certainly, in hindsight, there are some things that we could have done differently. But by and large, we have had a tremendous response to this coronavirus crisis, and I think it's important to point out the facts and some of those important numbers. We were one of only 7 states that didn't have a statewide shutdown. A recent study came out that showed that there were 45 states who had more serious restrictions on the economy and on the liberties of people than the state of Utah. We were in the bottom 5 in that category. You've heard a lot about Dr. Fauci and President Trump disagreeing on things. One of the things they both agree on and have said publicly is that the state of Utah has done a tremendous job in managing this response. Again, not just economically, but from a health standpoint as well, to have one of the lowest hospitalization rates in the country, to have one of the lowest mortality rates in the country. People have sacrificed and it has worked. And so as a state, this is what we do best in times of trial. We come together, and seeing what we have seen again, during the worst pandemic, one of the worst crises in our lifetimes for sure, we've seen Utahns come together to lift each other up. We have sewn 5 million masks as Utahns for our frontline workers. That kind of stuff doesn't happen anywhere else. Just today, our farmers are taking more sheep and food down to the residents of San Juan County, those of our tribal nations who are struggling right now. That's the best of Utah, and this pandemic has brought out the best in Utah.
Mr. Hughes, the state's response to the coronavirus.
Look, initially we had to get inside. We had a virus upon us that we didn't know with how contagious it was, if we could spread it without experiencing symptoms. I was all in on closing and being inside. But you cannot close this economy by government edict. You can't decide as a government what businesses are essential or not essential. You can't even begin the runway of how you're going to get people back to work as soon as possible. It is a false premise to say that we can stay in lockdown and self-quarantine while the federal government prints money to replace economic activity. It was never an option. We find ourselves with at least 115,000 people that have lost their jobs as we have prolonged this effort. This is not an acceptable way. I will tell you that the Bill of Rights are a government that tells you what businesses are essential or not, a phone that if it crosses state lines goes off like an Amber Alert asking you who you are, where you're going, and what your health status is. You know, communist-style snitch hotlines that have been asked of citizens to engage in. This is born by fear. We never make good decisions out of fear. We learn from this that the Bill of Rights always apply, especially in a crisis like this. So we learn from what we've gone through. I still don't see where we're getting people back to work right now. I'll tell you, as far as single source, no bid contracts go, there's a lot of questions, and I know that in a state of emergency there's a lot of time, or there's not a lot of time, and we're trying to do things quickly. But we have large technology companies who've said on the record that they offered these things, Apple and Google, for free. You have smaller tech companies that said the same thing. we're left asking the question, what is this about? Why did it happen the way it did? We're not getting clear answers. And I think that what we learn from this and we don't do again is we make sure that's a transparent process. And lastly, we have to reform our laws regarding state of emergencies and health department orders so that we don't see our constitutional liberties and some of the behavior we've seen in this pandemic ever happen again.
Mr. Huntsman, lessons from COVID in Utah.
Oh, I think there are a lot of lessons. And we will have another pandemic at some point. That's just how we're interlinked. I think we made a huge mistake by politicizing this whole episode. So the Hong Kong flu in 1969, never politicized. The experts ran it. So it would have been a good thing to have Dr. Dunn, who's perfectly qualified as an expert, to handle this situation. Instead, it was politicized. So what does that do? It leads to $100 million no transparency deals that still have not been properly explained. So part of being a leader, I know because I've been governor of this great state, is standing up and taking responsibility when you screw up. And that's what we've had. So what does it lead then to? It leads to a lack of trust in our institutions. So when people see that happening, they trust less and less in our elected officials and less in our process. There hasn't been a fair hearing on this. No one has stood up and taken responsibility for it. I don't know why. But we politicized the pandemic, and I think that was our mistake. What should we do going forward? I believe that going forward, we need to be very realistic about those who are at risk. And the numbers and the data are pretty clear. The folks who have tragically passed, and it's a heartbreak in every case, they've been over a certain age, pre-existing conditions, and many in long-term care facilities. Many others probably belonged in long care health facilities, but maybe couldn't afford it. They were also in a vulnerable category. That might be 15 or 20% of our state's population. We shut the place down. Why? Every county is different in this state, yet we practically treated everybody the same. Next time, let's keep 80% open and handle those differently who are most at risk.
Mr. Wright, please.
COVID hit us hard, and it hit us out of nowhere, and nobody could have seen it coming. So you don't want to politicize it, and you don't want to make decisions from a rear. But what you do want to do is you want to learn from it, and I appreciate the question. What we have learned is that we need checks and balances in government. We need to make sure that executive orders are not the governing rule of the day, that we cannot govern like that. We need guardrails put up by the legislature. We need the people's representatives to be involved in those decisions when they go on for an extended period of time. But the main lesson I've learned from the pandemic is that businesses have been hit hard, really hard. I'm a small business owner. I'm the only business owner on this stage with 250 people in my care. And I know what it's like to have to manage through these difficult times. And I have been contacted by business owners all over the state that are frustrated. And they're frustrated because they don't understand the color coding. They don't understand how they're supposed to stay in business. They're worried about their employees. They're worried about making payroll. They don't know how they're going to pay their rent. They don't know if their businesses will even be there tomorrow. The government didn't build our economy, despite what some of my opponents will say. Utahns, through their innovation, their hard work, and their dedication, built our economy. And when you close it unilaterally on everyone, look, I have 14 offices across the state of Utah. In some counties I was required to close, and in others I wasn't. But I made a responsible decision based on what I could do to contribute to not spreading the disease and taking care of my people. We don't need government compulsion. We need to allow personal responsibility in our society. We need to allow people to think for themselves and businesses to think for themselves. When government gets involved in anything, it usually ends up being a disaster. And what we need to do in the state of Utah is respect our personal liberties, our personal constitutional rights, and do the right thing, not because we're compelled by government to do it, but because we know what the right thing is to do, and we'll do it because we have personal responsibility and we believe in doing the right thing.
I didn't hear any names, but does anyone feel need for rebuttal? I see a hand.
I just want to make a clarification because I appreciate the answers here, but when we say politicized, I just want to define something, and I'm going to use an analogy very quickly. The President of the United States has a Joint Chief of Staff. He has generals that went to school, training, ready to go to war. You would not leave the decision whether our country goes to war or not to generals alone. You have a public servant, a commander-in-chief that is a civilian elected by the people. This decision of how this state proceeds has to be looked at through the lens of public servants, because a physician medical providers, they don't understand that bills, it's not their job to understand that bills come due every day. It's not their job to understand how this economy impacts the lives of people that bills come due every day and closing down in our schools. And so you have to have public servants making these ultimate decisions. The buck stops with our public servants.
Mr. Cox is asking for 30.
Yeah, thank you. So what has been said is absolutely right in one sense, and that is that the politicization of this disease is awful, and the only people playing politics with this disease are the people on this stage. Look, in hindsight, we understand it's easy to make those decisions. In the moment, it's incredibly difficult, and those decisions were being made and influenced at every level by the experts here in the state of Utah. But most importantly, it's the people of Utah who sacrificed, who flattened the curve in a way that we could be one of the first states to reopen and lead the nation, by the way, in the fewest job losses. Number one, to those who have lost their jobs, it's awful, it's heart-wrenching, but the state of Utah is better off than any other state in the country, and the people of Utah know that.
30 now to Mr. Huntsman and then 30 to Mr. Wright.
The only people politicizing this COVID-19 situation are here in this room. This is absurd. There has been absolutely no accountability taken for the $100 million transactions. Still no accountability. With leadership comes accountability. But I want to remind people where we've been for 3 months. We've been locked up in our homes, where the only people able to campaign and politicize have been those in the governor's office, using the platform, using it as a bully pulpit. This is absolutely absurd while we sit under house arrest and try to do our best to run a campaign. That's how this campaign is proceeded. And I just think it's absurd to say that people in this room have politicized it.
Mr. Wright, we'll give you the last word.
It's not fair to say that we politicized it from Lieutenant Governor, somebody who's been running for governor for almost 2 years as a sitting elected official and using his office to run for public office. And it's also not fair to politicize a situation when you're a business owner and the government is telling you what to do, and you have the right to ask the government why they're doing it. We have the right to ask, where is the $6.6 million for the app we paid for an app that's still not working? We have the right as citizens, as business owners, to ask these questions of our elected officials, especially when they've been more than willing to campaign and put themselves out there. So to say that we're politicizing it just really isn't fair. I think it's unfortunate. And this is why we see this unrest, Bruce, because people are frustrated with their government and they don't trust their elected officials.
Okay. We'll be able to circle back to this. We partner with universities and colleges, the Utah Debate Commission does, and students have submitted questions. Here's a political science student, Eric Montague from the University of Utah.
Hello, my name is Eric Montague, and my question is for the Utah gubernatorial candidates. And that question is, during COVID, we've had a lot of our civil rights infringed upon. Which ones were just, and which infringements went too far?
Let's ask whether there have been infringements of civil rights, and if so, what COVID-19 control measures do you believe went too far? Starting with Mr. Hughes.
Yes, our civil rights have been taken away from us. There's a statute that says that you can't take away someone's right to bear arms in a state of emergency. As governor, I'm going to promote that the whole Bill of Rights, we can go ahead and include that in our statutes, that you cannot take away our constitutionally protected rights. As I said, you can't have your phone monitor where you're at without your permission and without your consent going off like an Amber Alert when you cross the state line, asking you who you are, where you're going, and what your health status is. We have the people of faith. There are churches that have reached out to me that have said the state closed their doors and did not allow them to assemble, to worship. And then when the state order did come just a couple weeks ago that allowed for churches to assemble and worship again, it came with, and I quote from the COVID-19 task force and Spencer Cox's task force, these are the non-negotiable stipulations in which you can enter your houses of worship and be there. I'm telling you, that isn't a role of government. It's not the place for government to decide this. This is land of the free, home of the brave.
Let's move on to Mr. Huntsman, please.
When you live in places like Moscow and Beijing, you begin to really appreciate what civil liberties are. You know, one of the few things that differentiates us from every other country in the world. And I've seen people who have been told to do things and they just do it without questioning why, because that's what the state wants them to do. In this particular situation, I am not comfortable with a state that compels people at the border to fill out invasive questionnaires, like happened to my brother. That's what happens when you drive from Finland into Russia. And the questionnaire asks where you've been, where you're going, a little bit about information. You don't know where it's going, who's going to use it, how long it's going to be there. These are simple examples of a step-by-step level of infringement on our civil liberties that, unless questioned about why we're all supposed to do this the following way, as opposed to tell us what we need to know and let us govern ourselves. That's liberty. That's what we in the United States do.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
I think this question is a perfect example of why we need to educate ourselves, our children, and our society as much as we can about the great Constitution of the United States of America. It's the oldest Constitution in the world, it's the shortest, it's the most emulated, and it stood the test of time. By understanding those rights, we can preserve those rights for future generations. A government that'll take your constitutional rights, rights that they're supposed to protect. Rights are not created by government, they're given to us by God. They're inalienable rights, and government's job is to protect them. And when they take them, you can't trust government anymore. People will do the right thing. People want to do the right thing. We've seen Utahns repeatedly step up to the plate when asked to do so. In this particular case, the proper role of government was to disseminate the information, to help us understand the seriousness of COVID, and it is serious, and there's been major human devastation, and then allow people to make choices based on their freedoms and liberties. By understanding the Constitution, we can preserve it, and we deserve it, and so do the people that paid a great price to not only write it, but preserve it for all of these many years.
Mr. Cox.
Thank you. There's no question that preserving civil liberties is the most important thing that an elected official can do, especially in these difficult times. I'm very grateful for the decisions that were made by Governor Herbert, by legislative leadership, to enact the things that were necessary, and only those things that were necessary to protect the health and safety of Utahns. Again, facts are stubborn things, but 45 states had more restrictions placed on them than we did here in the state of Utah. We're very proud of that response. Yes, there were some things we could have been done better. Now, these half-truths about compelling people as they cross the border, none of that ever happened. This was simply a voluntary form that it was Angela Dunn, by the way, who suggested these things could happen. Because we had such a low rate of infection in Utah, people from California were trying to escape the issues and the restrictions being placed on them to come into our state and bringing the disease with them. And so we merely asked them voluntarily to let us know if they had any symptoms so that we could direct them to get testing so that we wouldn't infect Utahns. This is what's really happening out there. Let's make sure we get our facts straight before we misinform the people of the
Gentlemen,
state.
is there an urgent need to rebut?
Well, yeah, the
15
facts are
seconds,
straight.
15 seconds, please.
Facts are very straight. A stated order from our governor has inherently a Class B misdemeanor if you violate it. There was nothing in that order that said this was voluntary. You can have the governor come out after the fact and say, well, I won't enforce it. But let's be clear. It was an executive order to monitor and use our phones as surveillance devices. And just because the governor tells you that he won't enforce that Class B misdemeanor, it is still in effect until he decides it's not.
There was a hand from Mr. Hussman.
Yep. Yeah. Facts are stubborn things. We're sitting at 10% unemployment, the highest in recorded history. And people had to shut down. Look at the restaurant and hospitality sector, one of the great sectors in our state. Over 100,000 people they employ. They have been hit hard because their markets have dried up. They have not been able to engage in the marketplace because things have closed. And we have not let them, and counties and local officials, if you look at that separation of powers, make decisions that I think should be theirs.
Mr. Wright, I'll give you 15.
There's a pattern of behavior going on here. And that's why we need to elect somebody that has not held public office. My three opponents have been in office for over 16 years. This isn't the only challenge that we've had. Just recently, we learned that facial recognition software was being applied to DMV records, and nobody seemed to know about it. That had nothing to do with the pandemic. This is a pattern of behavior where government isn't watching our back. They are not preserving our individual liberties. And if we keep electing the same people, we're going to continue to get the same result. That's why I wanted to step in as an outsider and get inside this insider's game.
Okay, Mr. Cox, the last few seconds on this topic.
Well, look, again, the people of the state of Utah have just been incredible during this pandemic. And we forget this is a global pandemic. It's a novel coronavirus because we knew virtually nothing about it. We didn't have testing because the federal government failed us in those respects. Again, Utah responded better. Yes, we have unemployment at 9.7%, and it is absolutely devastating. It's also the 6th lowest in the nation. This is a global pandemic. It's impacting everyone. We have lost lives, and we're going to lose more. We have to balance. This is not a choice between the economy and help. We can do those things together. We've done it better in Utah, according to the president, according to Dr. Fauci, according to Harvard, and according to Forbes, as well or better than any other state in this nation.
We're going to move on, gentlemen. If you want to circle back, we'll try that. Until COVID-19 came along, the hot issue in Utah surrounded growth. The rapid growth and the state's supply of housing compared with demand is lower than it's ever been. Economists at the University of Utah say we have a shortage of 54,000 affordable housing units in the state, and that our market will look like San Francisco's in 20 years if we don't figure out how to deal with this. What will you do to bring together government and developers and builders and lenders and other stakeholders and citizens to figure out the changes required for our children, our grandchildren, to have affordable places to live? It would be Mr. Huntsman.
Just as we close out the COVID conversation, let me just close by saying that this is a health issue, to be sure, but it's an economic issue, and it's a mental health issue. 2 suicides a day, 12 attempts. How much is attributable to people who are feeling a sense of despair because they have nowhere to turn? They have no job left. So let's be sure that we put this in proper perspective. On growth, I think the numbers that we're looking at, which is to say doubling the state's population by 2050, I think those numbers are low. I think because of the dysfunction of states and cities, even in our neighborhood, and because of the lack of trust that COVID-19 has brought about to local and state governments, I think people are going to be looking for a safe haven. And if elected governor, again, I want to make this state a safe haven for investment, for innovation, for entrepreneurship, and for people to come. And we're going to need affordable housing. It's important not just for young people getting started, but it's important in the whole homelessness discussion as well. And we have a shortage of 45,000, there's no doubt about that. But what is it that we do to overcome that? Well, we've got to work with the private sector. We've got to make sure that we understand and recognize the market signals that we're getting. But sometimes the market signals are maybe going to be a little different than what we would like. We need to align economic development priorities with where people live. So why is it we have 100,000 people coming out of Davis and Weber counties who are working in Salt Lake and Utah counties? Let's do a better job aligning our jobs with where housing is affordable. And let's also do what we can to encourage home ownership, because a lot of young folks today are renting, and they're doing it because they're in fear of what their future might hold. The best thing we can do for stability in our communities is to encourage ownership. And I think there are ways to do that in partnership with the private sector and also by better utilizing our land.
Thank you. Your approach to affordable housing, Mr. Ryan.
The affordable housing crisis is a very serious situation in the state of Utah, because you're not just talking about housing, you're talking about the ramifications of children not being in stable households. There's all kinds of mental health implications. We're #1 in teenage suicide in this country. I'm very uncomfortable with that in the state of Utah. Those are not our values. The affordable housing crisis is happening for 2 main reasons. #1, there's a not in my backyard mentality that we need to educate and encourage people to overcome. If nobody wants to build affordable housing in their community, we won't have any. We can overcome that by being innovative, and I'm going to talk about specifics in just a minute. #2, the second problem is the zoning ordinances. When you have cities that have very strict zoning ordinances, it's hard for developers to develop the kind of product that we need in the market. State government should never tell cities and municipalities what to do. As governor, I would never advocate for that. But when you have these 2 problems, not in my backyard, and these zoning ordinances that are prohibitive, you get urban sprawl. Because the only thing you can control when you're developing housing is the cost of land. And the cheapest land is always on the perimeter of a metropolitan area. So we're going to create urban sprawl by not tackling the affordable housing crisis. So let me give you a specific idea, Bruce, of something we can do to solve the problem. We built big box retailers for many years in our country. This was before Amazon. The parking lots were probably already too big, even back then. Now, post-pandemic, post-Amazon, they're even bigger than they need to be. Cities could look at those and say, these are on main arteries. These are close to where people are working. Let's give a zoning variance for the owner of that land to build some affordable housing. That's right where it needs to be. It will reduce congestion. It will make the quality of life go up. We need to think about this in an innovative way. But my three opponents have had their chance. They've held the highest 3 offices in the land, and we have 54,000 housing units that we're short. It's time for a new leader that understands the problem and will work collaboratively with local cities to make it happen.
Mr. Cox, affordable housing.
Thanks, Bruce. You know, growing up on the farm, my dad always said that our greatest crop were our kids, but it was also our best export, and we sent them away and we never got them back. Rural Utah is another discussion for another question, hopefully. But urban Utah is starting to feel that now. Because of the price of housing, so many people are worried on the Wasatch Front that their children won't have the opportunity to live and raise their kids where they grew up. And that's something that deeply concerns me. Now, it's not the role of the governor to make decisions for local municipalities. I was a former city councilman and a former mayor, and I understand that the best decisions are made at the local level. But there are a couple important things that we can do. First and foremost, I say this often, but where there's a little formula that always works, where infrastructure precedes growth and density, the quality of life stays high. Where growth and density precede infrastructure, the quality of life goes down. The reason we have this not in my backyard mentality is often because we don't have the infrastructure for the growth that is proposed. The state can help with that infrastructure. A couple other areas where we are working closely right now with the private sector on real innovation. 3 areas. First and foremost, we need innovation in construction to lower the cost of construction, and there's some great things happening out there in the marketplace. Second of all, we need innovation around finance. We haven't seen much innovation. We did in the early 2000s, but it was all the wrong kind and led to an economic collapse. That's not the type of innovation we need. But real innovation around finance to open up markets and open up housing for low-income people and those that are just getting started in their lives. And finally, government regulation is the third area where we need innovation, because government regulation does increase the cost of housing. We've seen some municipalities like Spanish Fork and others who have had deregulation around mother-in-law apartments, which adds supply and makes it possible for homeowners now to make a little extra and provide space for those that are moving in.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes.
So the growth issue is absolutely a challenge. We have one of the highest birth rates in the nation. Unless we're turning into China and limiting our growth or our children to 1 child per household, we will continue to grow. What we can't do is grow the way we've grown up until now. We got over 3 million people in this state, and 80% of Utah's population lives in 4 counties and a 130-mile-long valley. We cannot sprawl. There's mountains that are surrounding us. It is not a sustainable plan to think that if we're going to double in population by 2050, that over 80% of 6.5 million people could somehow fit in these 4 counties of the Wasatch Front: Utah County, Salt Lake County, Davis, and Weber. It means that the rest of this state, rural counties, at least 22 counties, have never seen a day of economic opportunity. We want to deal with the growth. We need places for our children that live along the Wasatch Front. If they can't afford that housing because of the scarcity of housing, more demand than there is supply, they have places in Utah that they could go and make their life and make their way. If we want to see that those that are living in those communities that have been migrating here because they don't have jobs or they don't have an opportunity to make a life wherever in our state they live, we've seen that migration happen along the Wasatch Front as well. The way we do this is we have to see we grow the economic pie. It's another discussion, but it does talk about the growth and the housing. The cost of living will be much more affordable and practical for people as they have economic opportunities throughout this whole state. We got 29 states in Utah. We don't have to keep shoehorning everything in to just 4. We need that relief valve, and I think the people have pushed back considerably in the Wasatch Front, expressing their frustration. And at the same time, people in rural Utah are expressing their frustration that they haven't seen the same infrastructure investment so that they can grow their economies.
Thank you. Let's take another question from a student at one of our partner universities. Elise Hall is majoring in political science at BYU.
Utah is currently ranked 50 out of 50 for education spending per student, is ranked 22 out of 50 for K through 12 education nationally, and has a 34-to-1 average student to teacher ratio. What specific measures do you plan to implement to improve education for Utah's children if elected?
Mr. Wright, specific measures to improve education.
This is the best part of the debate commission, is students asking amazing questions like this and getting answers from candidates. So great question, Elise. Look, education has to be our top priority. We've got to focus on coming out of the pandemic and economic recovery for certain, but public education has been an ongoing challenge. I don't think we're 50th, I think we're 51st, which I didn't even know was possible until it came out. I wonder how much further we can fall before we finally step up to the plate and take this seriously, which is one of the reasons I'm running. My three opponents, again, have held the highest offices in this land, and we continually underperform when it comes to education funding and classroom size and some of the other challenges that we see. As governor, I'm going to be the public education governor. We don't need more taxes. We don't need more revenue. We need to reallocate the resources in our public education budget to make sure that they get into the classroom so that teachers are supported, so that they have the resources in the classroom so they can educate our children. It's been far too long that we've had a teacher shortage and our teachers have been underpaid. We need to make it happen by getting out of the teacher's way in the classroom and letting them teach without Common Core and all the bureaucracy that comes down from the federal government.
Thank you. Mr. Cox.
Thank you. This is the challenge of our lifetimes, education. We can get everything else we've talked about tonight right, and if we don't get education right, none of it will matter because we will fail as a state. Conversely, we can get every decision wrong, and if we get education right, we will be okay. As I've talked to teachers, and this teacher shortage is something we don't talk nearly enough about here in the state of Utah, but I found there are two things. One, of course, is compensation. I have a brother who was the teacher of the year in the 6-county region. He's no longer teaching because we don't pay our teachers enough. But there's something even more insidious that's happening out there, something that is driving teachers away, and that is that we have taken the joy of teaching out of the classroom. We have done that by over-regulating the entrepreneurs of the classroom. You can see it with high-stakes testing. You can see it with school grading, things that aren't making our kids any smarter at all and driving teachers away. When I hear teachers say to their own children, whatever you do, don't become a teacher, that's when we have a problem, and we will solve it.
Mr. Hughes.
You know, when I was Speaker, we put over $1 billion of new education funding in our budget, and we did it the conservative way. We cut taxes. In my time as a lawmaker, we saw reform that cut our income tax to a flatter 5% tax. When we cut the state tax off of food, and it was a $400 million tax cut back then. When you don't collect $400 million and you leave $400 million in this economy, what happens? We see, as supply-siders, we saw revenues rise, economic prosperity happen, we saw the revenue come in. But let me just tell you real quickly, if any candidate on the stage is going to tell you that we're walking into a year where we're going to increase funding, you're being sold ice cream, you're not being told the truth. Here's my fear. If you don't have commerce occurring, you don't have tax collection. If we don't get back to work and we don't see people making a living, you're not going to have the dollars that are being collected for our income tax, which is dedicated to our public schools. We're going to see massive shortfalls. If we take federal funds because we can't pay the bills, that's how you get Common Core, and that's how you get some of these federal mandates that in the long run hurt our education system.
Mr. Hussman.
This is all small ball. One of the biggest risks we face going forward is thinking small. So when was the last time this state had a big idea? Probably a very long time. So if we're going to do something special for our kids and for our families and for our future, because I've seen how the Chinese are educating their kids, are doing a pretty darn good job of it. The only way forward is to double our state's GDP. We can talk about everything else. We have to earn our way there, as I found out as governor before. I have a plan to take our GDP from $180 billion to $500 billion. And it's based around 3 industries that are $100 billion each in terms of what they can do: biotechnology, finance, and defense. We can make it happen, but we can also make it happen through public lands. The federal government owns far too much, and more of what we should get should be dedicated to education like so many of the states in our neighborhood have been able to do.
Gentlemen, we're up against the clock, and so I'm going to ask you to give me a 15-minute question, 15-second answer to a very brief question, because your environmental policies are going to be informed by what you believe about the environment. So my simple question is, do you believe in human-caused climate change? And yes or no, and why? We would be with Mr. Cox.
So the answer is yes, but I have to clarify that. That doesn't mean economic devastation. What we've shown here in the state of Utah is that we can do both. We're cleaning up our air at rates that we have never done before. It's a bipartisan issue. The Clean Air Caucus in the legislature is helping us. We're getting it done.
Okay, Mr. Hughes,
it's
up or
more
down?
than a yes or no, but no. To suggest that this planet has its climate has only changed because of man would be incorrect. Or should we be good stewards of the environment? Of course we should be, and we are. But man is not the reason why the planet Earth has ever changed its climate.
Okay, Mr. Huntsman.
I follow science, and the evidence out there would suggest that yes, that is the case. So it isn't a question of is it or isn't it, it's what are we going to do about it? And I think we have to remember we're all downstream, and unless we have other people who are willing to step and do something about it as well, we're going to have a problem.
Mr. Wright.
This is the problem with running for public office for outsiders, is it can be both. Yes, the climate changes over time. Of course it does. We've seen that. We've studied history. We know that. But we also know that humans emit, and we have carbon footprints, and we contribute, and we should do everything we can to preserve this incredible planet that we have. And even if it only makes a minuscule bit of difference, I want to do my part as a responsible citizen.
Okay, the clock says we're up for closing statements. Prior to air, it was determined and agreed that the candidates would deliver 1-minute closing statements in this order: Thomas Wright, Spencer Cox, Greg Hughes, and John Huntsman. So, Mr. Wright.
A close friend of mine told me before I got into this race that running for office is an insider's game. And he said, Thomas, you're an outsider, and they don't like outsiders in their arena unless it's with their permission. I've learned that the hard way. But I'm in this race, and I'm in it to win it. I'm getting an incredible amount of phone calls from everyday citizens that are fed up with government because they think government isn't looking out for them anymore. They think government's looking out for each other. And not only that, we're getting a record amount of investing going on in our campaign. We've raised more money this month than any other campaign. And I want people to know Thomas Wright can win this race. Don't fall for the polling. The polling is an insider's game. The polling will lead you to believe that public opinion is already set. And if we believed that, Hillary Clinton would be president, and Aaron Mendenhall would not be mayor of Salt Lake City, and so many other races that we've seen. I'm in this race to win it, but outsiders can only win when other outsiders see the wisdom in turning government over. I'm Thomas Wright, I'm running for governor, and I'm sincerely asking for your vote in this primary election.
Mr. Cox.
So yesterday, my dad pulled me aside and he said, "Are you sure you really want to do this? We're looking at a global pandemic. One of the worst economies in the history of our state. We threw an earthquake in there for good measure, and of course we've seen racial unrest and the riots in our capital city the last couple days." My answer to him was very simple. I'm doing this because I love this state. I care deeply about the people that live here. I believe we're unique. I believe we're special. I believe that we are a light to the nation. I'm running because the 2010s were the most prosperous decade in our state's history. And I'm running because the 2020s can be even better. Look, my friends, fellow Utahns, politics in this country is broken. But it's not broken here in Utah. We can reject negative campaigning. We can work together. We can bring together the voices of those who feel like they're not being heard. As your governor, I will get in the trenches with you and get my hands dirty. We will work side by side. We will shine the light on you and shine that light for the nation. I'm Spencer Cox, and I ask for your vote.
Mr. Hughes, 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Let me go back to my opening statement. I'm the conservative candidate for governor with a proven track record. Look, we have people in this state that would like to see this state turn purple, turn blue. They're registering as Republicans at record rates, and they're saying anyone but Hughes. That should tell you something about the course we have forward. I'm not afraid to say that I support our president, President Trump. I have seen firsthand as a public servant what he's done for this state specifically, that he'll probably never get the credit for, or people will never be able to, won't know the extent that he watches and he does lead as president and impact the lives for the good for the average Joe, the average Jane in our state. I'm asking for your support. I'm asking for your vote. We are surging. You're watching polls, and you'll see polls that show that we are the only ones in double digits going up in the polls and earning your support. I ask you to give us a serious look, put us to the test. Hughes and Iverson, we will do all we can to earn your support, and we would appreciate and be honored to have it.
Thank you. Mr. Huntsman.
I want to give a shout out to Michelle Kafusi, who's the great mayor of Provo, for taking this journey with me as the greatest running mate anybody could ask for. People ask all the time why I'm doing this again. I don't need a title. I don't need a portrait hanging on the wall in the Capitol. I've got those. I'm standing here tonight because I love this state. This is my home, and this is your home. I'm running because I think this state has a destiny to become the crossroads of the world, and I believe I can get us there. Now, in a few days, votes will be cast, and all the political noise will be over, all of the politicking. Then, this whole thing will be about one thing: leadership. If now isn't the time for experienced leaders with a track record of bringing people together and getting real economic results, I don't know when is. I humbly ask for your vote. May God bless the great state of Utah.
My thanks to all of the candidates for being here this evening, and particularly thanks to the many Utah broadcast stations that brought you this debate as a public service, and our sponsors, the Larry H. and Gail Miller Family Foundation and doTERRA International. Also, a special appreciation to the administration, faculty, and students of the University of Utah and PBS Utah for providing this venue. I'm Bruce Lindsay, thanking you for watching and wishing you a good evening.
Lisa Roche.
Actually, can I have water while I do this? Huh? That was the Rubio move. Remember when he was in State of the Union, he went like this?
Lisa, you ready?
Hi, Lisa.
I am. Hi, Speaker. Talk about how you think you did and how you think you differentiated yourself tonight as a candidate.
I don't know how I did. It's hard to self-evaluate in a situation like that. I've never been in one quite like that, but I did. I love debates because I do think it gives us that opportunity to, especially where you might start to sound the same, really draw some distinctions between yourself and the other candidates. And so I did enjoy the opportunities where if we heard things, we could maybe clarify and maybe share where we didn't agree necessarily. So I like the format. I hope we have more of these debates. I think the public, with a big decision like this in this month of June, deserve to have more debates. And so hopefully we'll have more. But I did. I wanted to strike a tone about, and it's really just what I've been saying on the campaign trail, but in a debate you get a chance to say it a little bit more broadly.
Well, how would you describe how you differentiated yourself tonight?
A couple ways. I feel that the state shutdown related to COVID-19 has taken constitutionally protected liberties away from us. I do worry about churches not being able to meet or doors being closed by the government. I worry about communist-style snitch hotlines, phones that act as surveillance devices. I think those are worrisome, and I think we ought to talk about it. Look, let's have some uncomfortable conversations in this campaign for governor. Let's talk about things that really need to be discussed. If we can't talk about the COVID-19 response and some of the real things happening on the ground and the fear that people are feeling and how it's compelling behavior, when would you talk about it? I mean, this open seat is probably the greatest opportunity for us to talk about the state's response and what we would do otherwise, or what we're seeing that we're not comfortable with. And so that was a major part, as you could tell. It was hard to get off that topic. But then you get to these riots, how sad this is. The protests are not the riots. These are very different things. But I'll tell you, it was hard for me to watch where government is saying, hey, you got too many kids at a playground. You got too many people assembling at a park. You need to break that up, and having law enforcement patrolling these parks, and then watch the violence that started to happen and turning over of police cars and setting them on fire and waiting for hours for law enforcement to be allowed to respond. Are we paying attention to this? Because it's not the same handling these situations the same. And I would argue people have a right to go to the park. And I would argue again, people don't have a right to turn over automobiles and set them on fire. So I think we're upside down right now, and I thought we tried to flesh that out a little bit in this debate.
Next question.
Mr. Speaker, you noted in the debate that there's a lot of people who are registering as Republicans and you're saying specifically vote against you. How much of a challenge do you see that, especially with these last critical weeks before the June 30th primary, if that's happening? Look,
here's the thing. It's not even an if. I think it's kind of rude to say vote for anyone but Hughes, but this is what the Democrats are saying. I mean, I've listened to the public radio story that interviews a Democrat that says that she's going to vote in the gubernatorial race against Greg Hughes. We have Jim DeBacchus, who was the chair of Utah's Democrat Party, who one of the most liberal state senators we've had, who's a registered Republican today, and told people on his social media feed, if we don't defeat Greg Hughes, we're going to wake up and have Governor Hughes just like we have President Trump. So it's not that I think this, it's that I keep reading anyone but Hughes from a lot of Democrats that are switching over, not because they want to become Republicans, because in the same breath they're talking about how they can get out of it in July, but they're doing it to really, instead of party build their own party, they're trying to take over the Republican Party. Let's just remember, this is a primary for a political party, the Republican Party, to choose their nominee for the November ballot. And so, yeah, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I think that the whole state should know that those concerted efforts and very public efforts are happening right now.
Should the primary be open then instead, so that the whole state can have a say? We haven't had a Democratic governor since '85, and if those people want to have a say, they feel like maybe voting in the Republican primary is the only way to do it.
So I'm of the opinion that you ought to have more than one political party in a state. I think that having registered members of a political party, be it the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, the United Party of Utah, whatever that party might be. Party building is part of our history, our heritage as a state, or as a country. To have open primaries or to say, let's just be practical enough, forget about other political parties and just all crowd into one party, I don't think that's healthy. I don't think this should be solely a one-party state. Let's have the battle of ideas. Democrats switching over to become Republicans, not because they subscribe to the Republican Party platform. It might sound pragmatic, but you're not party building, and I think that opportunity for Utahns to really have that battle of ideas and decide what candidates they want, articulating different opinions or positions, ought to happen in the November election, not in a respective political party's primary.
You said during the debate that initially you were supportive of people staying inside and shutting down. Obviously, that's not what you think anymore. When did your opinion change and why?
No, and it hasn't actually changed. I thought there was a time where you had to know whether you were healthy or not, or whether you had symptoms that you weren't aware of. So I think that was important to know whether you were carrying this virus unbeknownst to you. Because what I was told back in March was this whole state cannot get this virus inside of 2 weeks. We'll overwhelm all of our healthcare delivery and infrastructure. Well, here we sit in June. We were told to flatten the curve meant that people would still get this because we don't have a vaccine, we don't have any treatments for it, but we were trying to spread those cases out over a longer period of time. Well, we fast forward to June, and I believe we've flattened the curve, but we still have businesses that are unable to open. We have learned more about this virus at the same time and what vulnerable populations this particularly hits. And the worst part of what I'm seeing right now is with what we see and what we've learned about this, we have empty hospitals. There is nobody that's going to tell me that this state right now has a responsible public health strategy if you have empty hospitals where radiation treatments were happening, or chemotherapy, or mammograms, or colonoscopies, which are preventative care. Even emergency rooms, their visits have gone down 40%. There's nothing healthy about what's happening when you see an abandoned or a near empty hospital. And so I think what we started here, trying to figure out who had this virus and spreading out when cases would be, when you would have this, or if you would catch it, somebody moved the goalposts on us. We changed the definitions. We said, oh, you have to have less cases. You have to, and I'm going to tell you, the longer we don't have this economy running, we don't have taxes being collected, and people expect these children to go back to school. They have to go back. If you think that every child has internet access when their school ended in March, it's not the case. Children's education ended in March prematurely. There's nothing responsible or safe about that. So I think that the original need to go into the self-quarantine was responsible, but we should have been looking at how we were getting back to work and back to school as fast as possible with what we learned.
We've seen a big spike in the last 4 days in terms of case increases. Do you still think that we should open up the economy fully?
Absolutely. You can't burn down the village to save the village. It is a false choice to tell people the ability to stay inside. Bills come due every 30 days for a household, for a business. You can't interrupt people's livelihoods and say, look, here's a hyperlink to a federal website. Hopefully you'll get that money. I'm watching businesses that will never open again because government shut them down. I'm watching unemployment and jobs that have been lost forever that people won't be able to return back to. These are going to have consequences in our state and country. And so staying inside is just not an option. It's not going to work out well. I'm just, as we start to realize these consequences, people will feel them more. And if you don't have a responsible way forward, then you don't have a way forward. Then you're just allowing people are just going to do whatever they have to do to pay the bills, to make ends meet. And then you'll have a state government watching from the outside, looking in, wondering what should we do now? So this plan has to be one that understands the reality of life in a free market, that people have to get back to work. And here's the sad part. When you're around more strangers, there's probably going to be some more cases. But we were told at the beginning we weren't eliminating cases. We were just trying to get a slower take-up rate of how many people were going to get it without a vaccine. That was always the goal, at least at first. I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that we can contain or see this virus go away anytime soon. So we have to take smart precautions. We have to understand which populations are most vulnerable, and then act accordingly. And again, these need to be promoted. These need to be recommended. We have to let good information drive good decisions. But at the end of the day, the Bill of Rights still apply. our right to choose and our liberties to be Americans and do what we need to do to move forward in life, you can't take that away from us.
I think we've reached the end of our time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
You're trying to get the feed from Brendan? Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Test, test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Test, 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 test. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Who's our next candidate? Huntsman? I don't think he's taller than. I think he's maybe my same height or a little shorter. Are you getting a feed?
Yeah, it just sounds like really good unmodulated.
Is this a line level?
Yeah, that's line level. I think I'll just put my mic on the thing.
Okay.
It looks really good.
Cool. Did they want it to be zoomed in anymore? It seems.
Nobody's saying, I mean, you could.
If they're not saying anything, then I don't know.
Hello. Delighted to be with everybody. Thanks for supporting this debate tonight and for your willingness at your networks, your broadcast outlets, your newspapers, your blogs, whatever, for getting word out on what I think is the most important election we've seen, certainly in recent history in this state, for reasons I don't have to tell you about. I think most voters know that instinctively. But it's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you all for playing the role that you do in the free press. So, and I see Lisa Riley Roche there. Lisa, how are you?
I'm good, Governor.
Good to be with
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just turn it over to any questions you might have or anything you might want to say to get back at me for whatever I said.
There was a pretty pointed response from, it seems like, everyone in there after Cox said that the only politicization of the coronavirus response were for the people on the stage. Tell me more about your thoughts on the politics of what's happened in our state with coronavirus.
That's called deflecting the truth. There we go. I think what most people were referring to, certainly I was referring to, was the idea that you put somebody who is seeking higher office in a very prominent role, which doesn't need to be the lieutenant governor. I've been governor before. I know what lieutenant governors do. And you do it basically for the express purpose of giving them a platform. I call that politicizing the coronavirus task force. It's my opinion. I think a lot of other people have a similar opinion, and that's what I was referring to. I can't speak for the others.
Follow-up to that, there's been millions and millions of dollars spent, some of it largely at first on no-bid contracts. Is there a concern with the way the money's been spent? And if you were the governor, would you have done it differently, maybe taken more time and looked at what was out there and what the state could afford and who had what to offer?
Well, the governor has to make decisions. You're the leader. You don't delegate it to the lieutenant governor who's running for governor. That's not what you do. You also turn it over to the experts. I remember when we had a horrible mine tragedy in Huntington that killed 9 people. And we needed to have a completely independent approach to looking at mine safety so that people would believe our approach, that we were doing it right, and making up for some of the problems in the past that may have led to the loss of those lives. And I reached out to the candidate who I ran against for governor, Scott Matheson, just to make sure that there would be a view from the public of trust and integrity, no politics at all. And I just think that that's how I roll. You end up with the state appropriating $100+ million in various contracts. Dr. Angela Dunn argued against the anti-malarials that were ordered to the tune over time of almost $8 million. And it's the point I was trying to make. If when we turn things over to the experts, when the duly elected political leaders put folks in charge of things as sensitive and as important as the coronavirus task force, you generally want to do that with people who know something about the subject matter, who are public health experts. And I made the comparison to 1969 when we had the Hong Kong flu, which was a deadly flu. And there was no politics, and we didn't do that. The President of the United States, Lyndon Baines Johnson, got the Hong Kong flu. A member of the Apollo 8 space mission got the Hong Kong flu. We had Woodstock. I mean, life went on. And tragically, we lost people, but it was a different model. And I look at what was done then, just let the experts get out and tell us what they know and let us try to govern ourselves. I compare that to where we have been most recently. And politics, unfortunately, which creeps into almost everything, I think played way too prominent a role.
You mentioned your service in Moscow during the debate as they were talking about the phone call with President Trump this morning, and you talked about your response. We also had Speaker Hughes mention his support for Trump and that President Trump has done a lot for Utah. Where do you stand, and how, because you've served at the pleasure of the president in the ambassadorship, how would you approach the president?
Like I always have. And listen, everybody makes politics these days about Trump. because he becomes, for all of you, instant clickbait. And it's almost like we obsess over Trump. He's a president of the United States, duly elected. Let's kind of begin thinking about the real issues and kind of where we want to position ourselves longer term, and less about how we're going to deal with Trump. A lot of it, you know, and I don't want to blame all of you, but a lot of it's for entertainment purposes. I have a relationship with Trump. I get along with him just fine. And sometimes he would take my advice, sometimes he wouldn't, but we always spoke with each other respectfully. And I like my working relationship with him. He's a different manager. He comes from the developer community in New York City. He doesn't speak like a politician. He doesn't speak like a policy wonk. He just lays it out. And that's, you know, some people like it, some people don't. So if he is reelected, and I think he will be, I think it'll be really important for the next governor to have a good working relationship with the President of the United States.
Let's take a question now from Lisa Riley-Roche.
Lisa.
Hi, Governor. You said that the governor's COVID-19 task force was politicized by putting someone in who was running for governor. How would you have structured that had you been governor? And doesn't the buck stop with the governor,
Sure.
him or herself?
Sure. No, absolutely. The governor's in charge. And the governor does a huge disservice by allowing any hint of politics to be infused into such a publicly sensitive undertaking. And I think that's where we had an issue. So the governor, like every other state in America, should be in charge. That's just my opinion. That's probably why every other governor did that, because it was that important to their people. It'd be a little bit like, you know, if President Trump were to make Vice President Mike Pence head of the coronavirus task force while he was running for president. You can imagine the outcry from the public that would have occurred under such circumstances. So as for me, the governor is in charge. He should direct it. He made decisions that he thought were appropriate for whatever reason. In my own case, I would say, who do we have around here who is the expert in the subject matter? Because the goal is to build trust. The only way you do that is by taking politics out, putting experts in, and informing the public so that they can then govern themselves. The public isn't necessarily going to buy what a politician says, but they're going to listen to what Angela Dunn has to say. And they're going to listen to what some of her colleagues have to say. They're going to listen to what Dr. Fauci has to say. And I think that's an important part of how you balance politics and professional civil servants.
Other question?
Can you talk to us a little bit more about the protests that turned into riots in downtown Salt Lake City? You've been watching this. What are your thoughts about what's happening here in Utah? I think a lot of people didn't expect this to happen in the state of Utah.
No. I drove up State Street. I was coming back from an event up north, and I took the 6 South off-ramp and went to State Street, and then right on 4th, because I couldn't get through, I went up to South Temple. And on that drive, what I saw spray painted on public property, private property, was appalling. This was not what George Floyd and his family would appreciate, I am sure. This does no dignity to his tragic, tragic death. This is an example of lawlessness and anarchy, which should have no place in this state and in this country. I'm the first one who's going to stand up and argue for the right for people to protest. I did in Moscow to some condemnation, and I did in China. In both places, very, very sensitive operating environments. Why? Because we believe in the emancipation and the freedom of the human soul, and to be able to express through some civil society outlet their grievance. That's how we roll. And I think that's always to be what we prize.
But when it turns to anarchy, destruction of the house of the people, and defacing property, this doesn't do anything to further any goal by anybody. So the outgrowth of that were images that I've never seen in the state. In fact, I've never seen them anywhere outside of a war zone. Baghdad, Kabul, Humvees, Black Hawk helicopters, curfews. You grow accustomed to this kind of thing when you live in other places, but not here. And the first thought that occurred to me was, what are we doing to ensure that we preserve civil liberties so that people understand that even in this heightened state of alert, which almost approximates martial law, that they know that they're still allowed to express themselves, they're still allowed to petition, to congregate, to speak out, but in ways that are consistent with civil discourse. I want to make sure that our young people never, ever, ever forget that that's something that, should they choose to use it, is an appropriate outlet for them. But when it gets confused with anarchy, mayhem, and lawlessness, that's when the former begins to be eroded. And we can't let that happen, because public protests have always been a part of our unique democracy. So thank you. I'm guessing that's our time. Thank you very much.
Just high enough for me? All right. Okay. This one here, right? Okay. Yep.
Hi, Thomas. Want to ask you about the comments made about the politicization of the COVID response by the state. That got a little heated. Tell us why you feel that that's the case and what you would have done differently had you been governor to deal with the pandemic.
Well, I mean, look, the coronavirus is a really important topic. It's the most challenging thing our state is facing. And so to talk about it in a gubernatorial race, in my opinion, is fair game. And so I really wanted to make sure that we had an honest conversation about it. And I'll just point out that it wasn't my choice that the governor appointed a candidate for governor as head of the coronavirus task force in the middle of a race. It wasn't me who said, hey, I'm calling on all candidates to suspend campaigning and fundraising during the coronavirus, which the lieutenant governor did. He'd been running for 2 years, which is why I pointed that out, or maybe more. I've only been in the race since January 2nd, so I don't feel like it was politicized by anyone other than the lieutenant governor. And so for him to say that it was us, I just didn't think was fair. And I think this is about facts, and it's about informing the public about our perspective, and they can decide who they agree with. But I felt like it was important to speak up and have that perspective heard.
So how would you have handled this differently? Who would you have put in charge of managing
well,
the response to COVID?
I think I made it clear that the coronavirus hit us out of nowhere. Nobody saw this coming. So we're not politicizing the fact that this was a very difficult situation, an unprecedented situation. There's no book on how to manage the state of Utah through a global pandemic. So we have been very cautious in our campaign about not politicizing decisions that were made in real time in really difficult situations. That has never been politicized. But for us to be accused on that stage of politicizing when it was the lieutenant governor who's continually commented on the race, I just didn't think was fair. So all we've done in my campaign is tried to productively and positively talk about things that we've learned. And that was a really thoughtful question, I thought, by Lad Egan. I didn't have enough time to get to the third part of his question, but the third part is, what have we learned and what can we do to be prepared for next time? By talking about the state's response and how we can do better next time, we'll be better prepared. That's what Utah is all about. So this isn't about politicizing the most unfortunate thing that's happened in this state in a long time. This was about having an honest conversation about the most pressing issue in the state of Utah and learning from it so that the next governor will be prepared for dealing with this pandemic and whatever emergency might come up later.
Would you have been in charge of your administration's response had this happened during a Wright governorship?
I personally would not have delegated that to anybody. If I'm elected governor, the buck will stop with me. Something that's as pressing and as serious and as challenging as the coronavirus would have been kept in my domain, but that's just how I would govern. And see, Lisa, you're making my case. That is a fair question, and I'm not accusing you of politicizing the coronavirus. It's a fair question to ask a gubernatorial candidate, excuse me, what would he do or she do if he or she were in office? And so that's a fair question, and I have no problem answering it. I would be in charge of the coronavirus task force. I would stand in front of the cameras, and the buck would stop with me.
Other questions?
Talk a little bit about the protests that are happening. There's a peaceful one downtown right now, but over the weekend we all saw the pictures that it started out peaceful and did not end that way. Your thoughts on what happened?
Protesting in our country is American. It's the most American thing that you can do. And I'm not going to tell anybody how they can and can't protest, but for me personally, when it crosses the line into destruction of personal property, arson, vandalism, hurting businesses that have honestly been hurt bad enough, I'm a business owner, my heart went out to them. I understand the George Floyd situation. My heart broke when I watched that video. I don't even know how to explain that to my children, but I will. And I want to have an honest conversation about what happened. People have the right to protest the way they want. That wasn't the way I would have done it. I don't believe in arson, vandalism, and the destruction of personal property. Those that do that will be held accountable for that, and they should be. But I want to have an honest conversation about racial inequality in our country. And as governor, I will do that. I will have that hard conversation. It won't be something that will be ignored.
I have a question about you as a business owner. You mentioned how you have many offices throughout the state, and some are in different counties with different rules. And in your criticism of how Utah dealt with it, it seemed that you were advocating that people could make decisions for themselves. But with each county being different, I'm just wondering how you saw that play out. How authoritative would you be in the governor's office of dictating essential business, non-essential, who can stay open, who should close?
It's a thoughtful question, Lad. I'm glad you asked it because I've seen with my business in particular, and look, this is why I believe I'm the most qualified candidate to be Utah's next governor, because I understand the private sector, I understand business, I understand how hard small businesses have been hit. It's not theoretical to me, it's real. I have lived it. I'm living it today. I'm the only candidate for governor that spent this morning at his office trying to make it all work and then juggle being a candidate at the same time while a bunch of professional politicians campaign on the government's clock, right? And so that's why I brought it up. I think that's a fair criticism, and it's a challenge to be the outsider. That's why my friend told me I was getting into an insider's game, and don't expect anything other than you getting into their arena without their permission, and I've seen that in this race. So in my particular business, I've seen Summit County issue an order, for example, that didn't include real estate as an essential business, and we had to go to them and ask, hey, do you consider real estate to be an essential service? And the order was actually adjusted. And so I'm not critical of Summit County. I think they've handled the situation the way Summit County should have handled it. But when you try to have a one-size-fits-all edict, you're not managing to the nuances that are real in society. That's where personal responsibility comes into play. If I'm running an irresponsible business and I'm not doing things that I can do to protect the public and to protect my employees, I will go out of business doing that. That's the free market in effect. That's the country which we live in. That's why I love being an American and I love being a Utahn. And so I believe in teaching people the correct principles, giving them the correct information, and then trusting them to make their own decision and being personally responsible. I understand the seriousness of the pandemic. I know the devastation. I've had people I know be infected. I've seen the numbers. I know what's going on. And I don't minimize that for 1 second. But at the same time, I just think it's hard to create a one-size-fits-all. I said in the debate, and I will say it again, I believe the proper role of government is to disseminate the information, to educate the public about what's going on, to ask people to contribute in a meaningful way, and they will do it. Utahns will do it. We always rise to the occasion. We don't need government compulsion in the state of Utah. We will do it on our own free will, and it won't allow us to have to go and say, hey, does our business fit in or does it not, and have these orders continually refined. And a perfect example was rent. Do you remember when the governor talked about rent abatement or rent? I mean, it wasn't abatement. I think it was rent deferment. And it was very confusing. And then we had to hurry and adjust. And it's just let the private sector. If you have tenants reach out, you're going to be a compassionate landlord because you understand the situation. So I just believe in that. I believe in the goodness of Utahns. We don't need government to tell us to be good people. We already are, and we will do the right thing.
We have time for about one more question.
Let him off the hook.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just that good.
You spoke pretty emotionally a couple minutes ago about George Floyd's death and how you're going to explain that to your children. If protests here in Salt Lake had been more peaceful, is that something that you would have participated in and taken your children to?
Well, I don't want to minimize the peaceful protests because there were peaceful protests, and I applaud that. And look, people have the right to do what they want. There are consequences when they do it. I don't want to be involved in a protest that turns, violent, that harms the safety of those involved or damages personal property. But we live in a country where if people want to do that, they're going to pay the consequence. So the question was, how do I?
Would you want to participate in a peaceful protest?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to be really clear on this as a Republican candidate for governor. I was very uncomfortable with what happened. I want to be a part of the solution. I want to listen. I want to learn. I want to be a governor that convenes roundtables of different people, that has really hard and difficult conversations so that we can move things forward and solve the problems that this country faces. I'm not afraid to do that. And the best part about me running for this office is I don't make decisions. I will not make decisions on the horizon of the next election. I won't make decisions based on my approval rating, because if I only serve one term, I'll be more than fine with that. If the public wants me to go back into my private sector world, I will. I want to have the hard conversations because we have challenges in the state of Utah. They won't be solved by people that have been in politics for as long as my three opponents, who are always looking for the next office. It's never enough for them. For me, it will be enough to get in and serve and get out. I wanted to be the change I wanted to see in the political world. That's why I'm running for governor. So I'm not afraid to have those hard conversations and to acknowledge the challenges we have with racial inequality.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
They keep going out that way.
All right, I guess I'm last. The guy with the 100-mile drive ahead of him. How did that work out? So.
Let's begin.
So there was a lot going after you about politicizing the coronavirus response. Why do you think that you were, kind of their target?
Well, look, this is the silly season of politics, as we say, and I think that there's certainly different reasons. One, because I have been engaged in the coronavirus response, for sure. I think, look, it's just this is politics, and part of being a leader, we understand that we're going to take those arrows. I've been very fortunate to work with an incredible team, Governor Herbert at the lead. Just like President Trump appointed his vice president to handle the coronavirus response at the federal level, I was asked to lead this coronavirus task force. And I think it's important to know what that task force does. That is, we brought all of the experts together to make recommendations to the governor and to legislative leadership on those decisions. I can only imagine what they would have been saying about me if I was campaigning instead of doing my job. But I swore an oath to the people of the state of Utah to serve as their lieutenant governor. Governor Herbert and I are a team, and we will continue to be a team until our term expires at the end of December. And so I gave up my campaign. I literally did not campaign. I even asked people not to donate to my campaign as we worked on this issue around the clock. I mean, we were putting in 16-hour days, 18-hour days, 20-hour days, no sleep for a month and a half. And so there was no politics involved in that decision. Again, I was elected to do this job. I'm going to keep doing this job until the end. It's more important than running for governor. And I'm just so proud of our team, and most importantly, the people of the state of Utah who have stepped up and sacrificed in so many ways, who have given up so much to save the lives, literally save the lives of people here in our state, and I couldn't be more proud of their response.
Not long before we came here to the debate, the president was in the Rose Garden and saying that he wanted states to make sure the National Guard was keeping, I guess, a foot down on some of these protests that we saw even in Salt Lake City that went from a protest to a riot. Here in Utah, we were just talking a minute ago about the fact that we had Blackhawks or Apaches flying over the city. We had Humvees out. We now have a curfew in the city, and the governor shut down the Capitol for the next week. What's the right balance in making sure that we don't turn into a police state, but we're also keeping Utah businesses and the people of Utah safe?
Sure. So this is a critical time in our country, and there are a lot of people that are angry and rightfully so, and they deserve the right to protest. It's one of the things that makes our country so special. It's founded on this idea that we can stand up to government. That the government doesn't come and power doesn't come from lineage. That it comes from the people, and that we give that power to our elected leaders, and we get to take it back every 2 or 4 or 6 years, and we get to stand up and protest and tell our government when we don't like what's happening, and we respect that right. It's so critical, and again, people should be angry with what they saw and what happened. But what we've also seen are people have hijacked this for their own purposes. As I said earlier, these agents of chaos, that's all they care about is looting, property destruction, overturning cars, lighting them on fire. That's not, we can't stand for that. And so the governor waited until it was absolutely necessary to make that call to bring in the National Guard. I want to commend our police officers, our highway patrol troopers, and our National Guardsmen and women. And let me remind people, the National Guard is not the military. The National Guard, these are your neighbors. These are people who live here and volunteer their time to protect and serve. And so, yes, when we start seeing that there is an element of destruction, and when we're lighting things on fire, when they're throwing rocks and hammers and axes at police officers, and we need some support, that's what the National Guard is there for. It's one of their duties. And so I'm very proud of the way that they handled the situation, that there was very little property damage, and no lives were lost, and it was because of their ability to de-escalate and diffuse the situation. And so, we will keep them. We'll make sure that they are on standby. The governor has said that, and we hope we don't have to use them. But if those bad actors come back, again, to hijack what is a legitimate exercise in protesting, then we will make sure that they are taken care of, so that the real protesters can exercise their constitutional rights.
Let's hear now from Lisa Riley Roche via Zoom.
Hi, Lieutenant Governor.
Did I hear your dog barking?
Yes, you did.
Okay. I was just wondering.
Everyone gets to hear my dog bark on Zoom. I'm wondering if you have any second thoughts about serving in the role that you did over the COVID-19 task force, and how would that have looked in a Cox administration if you were governor and this situation arose? Would you take charge of such a situation, task force, or would you give it to your lieutenant governor to handle?
Sure. So first of all, no, I don't have any regrets. And second of all, the question implies something that isn't true. Governor Herbert has been involved and has been the decision maker. He is in charge of the task force. If you look at the way this is laid out, he is in charge of every decision that comes through that. The whole purpose of the task force was just to organize people to give information and make recommendations where necessary. So Governor Herbert has been in charge of this response. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to look up here, not down here. Governor Herbert has been in charge of this response from the very beginning. Make no question about that he is in charge. And again, my role was an organizational role in bringing people together, and I absolutely will do that. Let me tell you something about Senator Deidre Henderson. I can't wait for the lieutenant governor's debates, because she is one of the most brilliant public servants that we have in this state. She served in the role of a state senator for 8 years. She understands policy as well as anyone in this state. She's incredibly eloquent. She's talented. She should be running for governor, to be perfectly honest. I feel so lucky to have her as my running mate, and I would not hesitate to put her in charge of something exactly like this. That's why I asked her to do this job. That's what we need, and having a governor who has served as lieutenant governor. Governor Herbert became the governor in the middle of the Great Recession, unexpectedly. I got the opportunity to serve with him 4 years later when Lieutenant Governor Greg Bell resigned, and it has been the honor of a lifetime, because we are a partnership. We do work together. When there are big decisions or little decisions, we converse. He listens to my input. We lead together. Two is always better than one, and I'm so grateful for those opportunities that I have had, as he has seen in me that ability to lead. It's one of the reasons that he endorsed me. He knows all of the candidates. He loves all of the candidates. They're friends of his, but he knows my leadership capacity, and the opportunities that I have had have prepared me for this moment. And so, yes, on day one, I would give this assignment to then Lieutenant Governor Henderson, because she will be, make no mistake about it, she will be the best lieutenant governor this state has ever had. And I know a little something about lieutenant governors.
We have time for one more question.
Thomas Wright said it would be better to let businesses and the community decide during the initial phase of the pandemic how to respond, who should close, how to be responsible. Would that have worked, or did it need to be more from the top, more strict, and government orders on the county and state level?
Well, Thomas is right in one sense, and that is that business leaders do need to be involved in those decisions, and they were. One of the very first things we did was to stand up an economic recovery task force. We had over 80 industry associations and over 150 business leaders who were involved in putting together the first comprehensive health and economic recovery plan in the United States. They were involved in drafting that plan. They were involved in making those decisions. What people have somehow forgotten over the past 2.5 months is that when this pandemic came out, we did not have testing capacity. That's been discussed ad nauseum. The CDC came up with their own test. The test failed, so we were going blind into the month of March, and that was a huge disservice to everyone in this country. And so we had to make decisions based on a lack of information. Now, of course, with all of the information we have now, it would be very easy to make some some decisions that were different. We didn't have that luxury at the time. Also, let me remind you that supply chains were completely broken. We didn't have access to personal protective equipment for our frontline workers. We didn't know, again, because of testing, where the disease was and where it was spreading. And so it was all hands on deck. And yes, these business leaders were involved in those decisions. And in fact, there's been some criticism of that, which is a terrible criticism, because they really did come together with solutions. They helped us get personal protective equipment into the state. They helped us get testing into the state. We've worked very closely with our business leaders. But the role of government in a pandemic like this since the beginning of our country has been that we bring those leaders together and we have to make those decisions. And again, the governor, legislative leadership made those decisions. We called a special session to bring in the legislature to help weigh in on those decisions. We formed an economic and health commission to help make these decisions. There are business leaders serving on that commission, as well as health leaders, public health, those from our hospitals. It's a wonderful collaboration. And again, this is what we do so well in the state of Utah. This is why we have other governors and those at the federal level asking us how we were able to respond in a way that didn't shut everything down and that began to open things up sooner than just about every other state out there. So proud of our response and proud of the business leaders who were part of that response and coming up with the best practices for businesses to follow so that they could open up and still protect the health and safety of the people of the state of Utah. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Thank you.